How do you teach your children to be happy? Why should you teach your children happiness? And how do you keep yourself happy? All this and more on this episode of the Dad Time Podcast. On our show today, we have Mike Ferry, who is an author, coach, and middle school history teacher in Richmond, Virginia. He's a dad of 4 children, and he's written a book called Teaching Happiness and Innovation, which is on his website or on Amazon. He's also an active songwriter and musician, and he maintains a blog at www.happinessandinnovation.com. Mike's here today to talk with us about how dads can teach their kids to be happy. Mike, welcome to the show, and thanks for coming on the Dad Time Podcast.
Oh, it's a sure thing, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
So let's get down to our first question. Why should we teach our kids how to be happy?
Well, this really is the universal desire that we have as parents, right? Regardless of who we are and where we live, we all want our kids to find happiness in life. And as it turns out, there's actually a science of happiness. And if we can incorporate some habits and values into our parenting style, then we're going to make happiness much more likely as an outcome for our kids. We don't have to wait for it to descend from the heavens, so to speak. We could try to bring it about through the things that we teach our kids as they're growing up.
Yeah, I think sometimes we forget that, happiness is something that we decide to do and not just something that magically happens to us.
Well, you're right. It flows from our habits, from our interactions with other people. Our emotional state comes from the ways that we think, and with practice, we can move all of those things into a positive and happier direction for ourselves. And we could do the same thing for our kids.
I want to get a little bit into your book. So, just tell me a little bit about why you decided to write it. Was there some epiphany moment or did you just wake up in the middle of the night and go, I need to write this book? How did the idea come to you, and where did that come from? Well,
a few years ago, I had the opportunity to head out to San Francisco for an education conference. As you mentioned, I'm in the Richmond, Virginia area, so it was a wonderful chance just to get out of town for a few days and tour around that beautiful city. But while I was there, I learned about the science of happiness for the first time, and that really totally changed my perspective on teaching and parenting, and it led me to the book Teaching Happiness and Innovation. And, my perspective now is that we should be teaching these habits of happiness in the classroom and at home. And the earlier we start, the better the results will be.
And, I read in your book, you've always had this sort of fascination with the brain. And so that must really have resonated pretty strongly with you when you were at the conference.
Oh, it did. It absolutely did. And one of the ideas that's at the heart of this science of happiness is the concept of neuroplasticity, which is the ability of our brains to become stronger over time at whatever it is that we do most often. So this is why practice makes perfect. The more you do something, whether it's practicing fielding ground balls or playing the violin or doing your math facts or practicing happiness habits, then the better your brain gets at doing that particular thing, and the more automatic that behavior becomes. And really, we can get to the point where we're creating optimism on autopilot, and we don't even have to think about it. We just train our brains to be happier.
Yeah, there's a great book that I read, The Power of Habits, and it talks about a football team and how as an NFL team and how they weren't all that great, but with practice they really became automatic. So it wasn't, becoming a great football player wasn't about, being a great football player as an individual, but working together as that exactly what your players, your teammates going to do and that sort of thing. So I think it's really interesting how we kind of, in an everyday society, sometimes look over some of these habits and training our brains, like you say, and just practicing and making things happen for us. And I think it's really interesting how we sometimes overlook some of those details in our lives.
Well, you're right. And as I learned more about the science of happiness, I've learned that really so many things that we can do are really simple, and they're 100% within our control. And it's just about changing our priorities and making repetition of these key behaviors and thoughts a part of our lives. And yeah, I haven't read that book that you referenced, but I am a coach. I coach basketball and soccer primarily. And if you want your teams to be successful, then you really just have to practice those fundamentals. And it's all about repetition. That's how you get better. When you get into a game situation, especially a clutch sort of anxiety-ridden situation, you want to just go on autopilot. You want to react. You don't want to have to think, because when you think, that's when you're more likely to make a mistake. And that automaticity totally comes from repetition.
So with that, taking that thought of, doing something small every day to be happy, I want to get a little bit into, in your book, you talk about creating success with happiness. And I really want you to go into, why this is sometimes a misnomer, and tell me what your definition of happiness is.
Okay. Well, first of all, on the success piece, this was one of the more interesting things that I learned at that conference, because when we think about success, and we can define it however we want, maybe it's getting your dream house or your dream spouse, or winning the Super Bowl, or getting your the job that you've always wanted, getting into your top, most ideal college or university that you're applying to, whatever the case may be. However we define success, we tend to think that success will make us happy. But in fact, that's not always the way that it works out. And if you think back through your own life, your own experiences, or maybe those of your friends and family, etc., I'm sure that you can think of times when you attained some kind of a goal and it was a little hollow once you got there. And the research suggests that success does not always make us happy. But on the flip side, the happier we are to begin with, the more successful we are likely to become. So if we want our kids to do better in school and in life, and ultimately if we want them to be happy, then if we can start by practicing those habits of happiness, then we'll kill two birds with one stone.
Yeah, and it's really not about the final destination, right? It's about the journey.
Yes, for sure. It's about the journey. It's about being in the moment, making the most of every day, of every experience that you have, and making the most with your friends and the things that you love to do. And for me, happiness is about it's a disciplined, communal, purpose-filled way of living. So many of us, especially in our consumer culture, tend to look at success as equating happiness, but also material possessions and all the things that we're urged to buy on TV and the internet and radio and elsewhere. But really, that's not what it's all about. It's about doing the things you love to do with the people who mean the most to you, and ultimately figuring out how you can do a bit of good out there in the world. and leave this place a little better than it was when you entered this place.
So let's go ahead and talk about, specifically, this is the Dad Time podcast. So, what are some things that dads could do to start teaching their children happiness?
Well, one of the easiest things to do is to start practicing more gratitude. Gratitude is one of the central habits of happiness. The more time we spend being grateful, the happier we're likely to be, and also the healthier we're likely to be. There's a lot of research showing that grateful people tend to have stronger immune systems and better heart health. And gratitude is also linked with longevity, so it helps us live longer. So gratitude has so many benefits, and we'll get better at being grateful with practice, with repetition. So as dads, it's easy, or actually maybe easy is not the word. I should say it's free and it's simple, not necessarily easy, but it's not a terribly complicated thing to incorporate more gratitude into your family.
And so what are some ways you do that? I mean, I keep a journal every day, and one of my questions is, what were you thankful for? So that's a way for me to, keep focused. And I notice that sometimes when I fill that out, I'm like, wow, I didn't even think of it now, so I think it's something that's easy to forget to do every day. And so what are some ways that you suggest we do that with our kids? Is it having them verbalize it and say thank you? Is it having them write a note? Or how can we get our kids to show gratitude?
Sure. Well, one thing that we try to do in our family is if we're in the minivan driving to a baseball game or to school or wherever, I try to make it a point to go around the car and say, hey, what's one thing we're grateful for today? Or what's one thing that went well today or in the last few days? So that's it, especially when the kids are a captive audience. That's one way to try to get it. That's one way to try to get it out of them.
Do you get them? Do they go groan? Oh, Dad, not this again.
Well, that's another part of it. Is as the dad, we have to be the ones who have the sense of humor and who keep things moving in a positive direction, even when everyone is conspiring against us to do that. So, yeah, there are plenty of times when I get the rolling of the eyes and the grumbling, but you just try to make it lighthearted and humorous, and you just power through. And eventually the kids realize, okay, he's serious. We have to do this. Okay, this is kind of ridiculous, but whatever. But the thing is, with time, this will become an automatic task, something that no one has to think about, and it'll be a major benefit. So that's one idea that I would try. And another is to get a stack of Post-it notes and to create a gratitude wall in your kitchen or another room where you spend a lot of time in your house. And it might be every day, it might be every few days, but just everyone in the family can grab a Post-it note and write down something you're grateful for, or maybe draw a picture and put it up on the wall. And as you pass that wall, it'll start to fill up pretty quickly, and you'll be reminded visually of the good things in your life. And this is really important because we tend to forget. As you just mentioned, it wasn't until you were remembering what you're grateful for to put in your journal, you had forgotten that it happened. And then when you look back through the journal, you remind yourself, oh yeah, yesterday was pretty good. Oh wow, last week I kind of forgot about that. So it's a way to do something that's active and creative. It keeps these moments of gratitude fresh in our minds, and also leads to some cool conversations as a family. As a parent, sometimes we don't really know what our kids are grateful for, but it's really heartwarming to see the things that they put up on the wall. and that can lead to more interactions, and it's just an all around positive sort of experience.
I think that's such a great idea. We're going to do that at my house. I'm going to get a bulletin board or something that we can put up because it's close to that, that love jar concept, but it's out in the open so you can see it all the time. You don't have to, physically open the jar and kind of go through the notes. It's such an awesome idea.
Oh, well, cool. Yeah, well, go for it. And to your listeners, if you try the gratitude wall or any other ideas, and just you can tag me on social media. I'm on Twitter at MikeFerry7, and also on Facebook, Mike Ferry Author. And yeah, I'd love to see and hear about your experiences as you're trying these ideas of teaching happiness to your kids.
Well, fantastic. I know I'll have a picture of my wall on there sometime here in the future. So tell me, how has being a dad influenced you? How to keep yourself happy? As dads, it takes a lot out of us, right? So how do you keep yourself happy so you can influence your kids and your...
Well, that's a great question, because as a middle school teacher and as a father of 4 kids, it can be an overwhelming and stressful kind of existence. So I do take the time out to practice gratitude as often as I can. I also like to read whenever I get the chance. Unfortunately, I don't get as much of an opportunity as I'd like all the time, but when we read, we are able to focus our attention on something for an extended period of time. We engage our imagination and our creativity, and all these things tend to make us happier. So gratitude, reading, any kind of exercise you can get. Of course, when you've got a busy work schedule and a busy family schedule, that can be really hard. But even just going for a 15 or 20-minute walk here and there can make a big difference. And we've gotten to the point now where our kids are older. Our oldest is 14, our youngest is 6, and our kids are very much in the sports. So now we can play sports together. Now, it wasn't the case up until just a few years ago, but we could play basketball and football and other sports together, and that's a lot of fun for the kids and for me and for my wife, and it's a great bonding experience too.
Yeah, I think getting the whole family out and moving together is just so important to being active, and I think it's a big part of bonding as a family.
Oh, for sure, because as parents, we have to spend so much of our time, telling our kids what not to do. But when you're out playing a sport, they get to see the lighter side of you. You get to just let your guard down and have fun together. Plus, you're getting exercise, which is good for your overall health and well-being. So yeah, it's wonderful.
Do your kids get mad when you beat them in sports?
Well, actually, they've gotten pretty good, and usually they're on the winning end.
I think that's where life comes full circle, right? Where you realize it's something you created actually beat you, and something that you...
That's right. Yeah. And then it's all good. Of course, I get to the point as a dad where I'm happy to see my kids starting to surpass me in different areas. It's pretty cool to see that.
Yeah, I thought I was pretty good at playing race car games on the Xbox until my son came around. Now I can't win a stinking race. So, so I just, I think that's another point we need to make too, is that you've got to be happy first before you can teach your kids to be happy, right?
Without a doubt. And yet parenting is stressful. There's no way around it. The politically correct thing to say is that it's this life-altering event and it's all bliss all the time. But that's just not true, and it's very hard because when you're involved as a parent, you lose so much of yourself, and you don't have the freedom to do what you want to do when you want to do it, and that can create a lot of anguish for people. So we, as parents, if we want to be mentally present to our kids, we have to work on some happiness habits ourselves. It's not just our brains and our emotional well-being, it's not just going to be where we want it to be on its own. We have to move it in the right direction.
Yeah, it certainly takes a lot of work, and it definitely helps to compartmentalize, when you're going through a lot of stress, to, sort of section that off for a little bit and deal with your kids separately from the stress that you're dealing with. Because one thing you don't want to do is let that stress bleed over and influence how you interact with your kids.
Well, you're right. And it's not easy to do. It takes a lot of discipline. But in the long run, these years are they're fleeting. They go so fast, these years when our kids are little, and we just want to do everything we can to make them the best years possible for our kids and for ourselves, and helping to calm ourselves and to bring our stress levels down, and maybe to practice a bit of mindfulness, some meditations here and there, or to do other things that make us happier. It's important for our kids, and it's important for us too.
So is there anything else you'd like to add about happiness and dads, or are there any things that you can think of at teaching their kids happiness over, maybe moms or other family members?
Well, I mentioned it before, but it's been my experience that typically, the dad tends to be the goofball of the parents, and just having a sense of humor and laughing is so important for our overall health. And there are lots of studies showing the impact of laughter on our brain health and our physical health. And just to bring in jokes of the day, or just to do things that we know will lead to jovial situations, it really goes a long way. And it also sets the tone that the family is not all serious all the time. And I think it makes it easier to deal with the really difficult moments when you know that mom and dad are going to be reasonable and level-headed, and they even have a sense of humor about things. So the more of that side of you that you can show to your kids, then the happier your home environment is going to be.
Yeah, and I think, laughter is such an important coping mechanism, because our world tends to be pretty serious. And I think, like you said, just being able to know how to laugh and know how to be a little goofy, at the appropriate times is just so important for just coping in our ultra stressful, ultra fast paced, world that we live in today.
For sure. You're exactly right.
So next, I'd like to dive just a little bit deeper into your book. And one of the really interesting things I found in your book was you're talking about the growth mindset. And can you go a little bit, into the difference between the growth mindset and the fixed mindset, and really some examples of how you've seen that play out in today's modern society?
Yes. Well, this is a really important concept, this idea of mindset. And if you have a fixed mindset, then you think that you're as good as you're ever going to be, and that your birth basically gave you all of your skills, all of your abilities, and there's absolutely nothing you can do to improve. So you are as creative as you're ever going to be at birth. You're either a good math student or you're not. There's nothing you can do about it. There's no way you could ever become a better athlete, regardless of how much work you put into it. These are all fixed mindset beliefs. And the opposite of the fixed mindset belief is the growth mindset belief. And when we have a growth mindset, we realize that effort matters. And through practice, we can improve, and we can make ourselves into better athletes, better musicians. We can improve how we do in the math class. We can become better writers, better critical thinkers, better at being creative, and on and on and on. And if you have the growth mindset, then you're much more likely to put in effort when the going gets tough. So as a result, you're going to be more successful. You'll push through the obstacles that are in your way. You won't take criticism personally because you know that, well, you can just work a little bit harder and you're going to be more likely to attain your goals. So, and as you can imagine, the growth mindset is critical for our kids if they're going to do well in school, but also in life. Because if you think that you have it within you to achieve success regardless of what you face, then nothing's going to knock you down. And you're going to reach ever higher levels of achievement in whatever domain you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think that growth mindset is, something that dads, I think, especially teach very well because, we tend to be a little more, hands-offish. We're going to stand behind our kids and let them try and fail. And I think that's just such an important part of learning. It's a little bit sometimes uniquely suited to the dad.
You know what? That's a really good point. I never thought of it quite that way, but I think you're exactly right. And another thing that dads tend to bring to the equation is the fact that so many of us love sports, and the growth mindset is a huge part of sports, right?
Sure.
Nobody says that that the Patriots won the Super Bowl just because of their good luck.
Right.
Maybe it's because that they deflated footballs or something. Who knows? But but I mean, you look at a guy like Tom Brady, and you can't say that he has accomplished all he's done just based on talent.
Right.
I mean, the guy is an unbelievably hard worker, and everybody knows that. And so, as dads, we can bring in these concepts from sports. So we could say, look, the team that makes it to the World Series, the team that wins the Super Bowl, national championship in basketball, whatever the case may be, no one just gives that to them. And they didn't just wake up one day with the ability to win the title. What we don't see behind the scenes is hours and hours and hours and hours of work and effort and toil.
Right.
And that's why they're able to succeed.
Yeah, everybody just looks at that final product, right? That Super Bowl ring, and nobody looks at hundreds of hours that they spend practicing the same play over and over and over again just to get it perfect. Right.
And we don't think about the time in the weight room and the time spent away from family. And, especially I think about baseball, the baseball season, Major League Baseball season, and half of the season you're on the road.
Right.
And, that it's a physical toil, but it's a mental and emotional toil for guys, especially guys who have to leave their families behind. So it's a huge sacrifice, and there's an awful lot of effort and hard work that goes into any level of accomplishment in sports. And I think it's a great tool to teach our kids.
So in your book, you also talked about grit. And I think, I don't know why, but I just really like this concept. And I like that you called it what you called it. But, can you go a little bit about into what you think grit is and why it's needed? And also tell me why you think we're failing to teach our children grit.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and this is another place where dads can help. With the tough love sort of comment that you had earlier. Grit is basically the ability to do what you don't want to do for a long period of time. And, basically just to suck it up and get on with it. It's not pleasant. You'd much rather be doing something else. It doesn't necessarily feel good, but you just put your head down and you power through. And
for instance, like the 10 minutes it takes my kids to clean their rooms, right?
Right, exactly.
Just spend the extra 8 minutes and get it done. After a minute, they're going, Dad, this is too hard. I don't want to do this.
I know. Well, that's the universal response. Like, 10 minutes? Are you serious? This is torture.
But I think it is those, those little moments that we can teach our kids that they can learn to persevere later on. I mean, teaching them that, no, you've got to stick with this task and finish cleaning your room. I mean, that's really going to teach them later on how to, at work, they may be assigned a project that they don't want to do, but they've got to get done. So I think there's a lot of translation there between, these little lessons that we give them to sort of the greater life lessons.
Oh, yes, I agree 100%. Whether it's down the road at work or in personal relationships, in school, the people who have grit, the people who push themselves to do exactly what they don't want to do for a long period of time, these are the people who tend to find the most success. And they're also the people who are not going to be defeated by stressful situations. And if we don't allow our kids to develop this sense of grit, if we give our kids the easy way out all the time because we don't want them to suffer, we want them to be happy in the short term, we just don't want to see them experiencing any level of discomfort. If we do these sorts of things, then we're setting them up for failure. Because, as we know, the real world is not going to be very forgiving at times. And those kids who have developed the ability to persevere will thrive, and those who don't have that capacity will have a lot of trouble, and much of that trouble will be emotional trouble.
Yeah, I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a graphic out there and it shows success. The top of the graphic shows it, a little stick figure from point A to point B, and it's a straight line, and it says what people think success is. And the bottom graphic shows, a line that's all squiggly and it's full of, a big deep hole with some water in it, and then there's a giant mountain with some snow on the top of it, and then finally it has the destination success, and then the bottom of the graphic says, this is what success actually is. And I think that concept of grit is just, it's one of the things that will just help us teach our kids to be able to power through things and really, make it to the finishing line without giving up halfway through their adventure or their journey to success, whatever that is.
Yes. Yeah, I agree 100%. It's really, really, really important. Okay.
In your book, you also talked about focused attention and reactive attention. Tell me a little bit about why you think focused attention is developed and reactive attention is being overdeveloped.
Sure. Well, focused attention basically is our ability to maintain our focus on something for a sustained period of time. Reactive attention is our ability to react to changing stimuli in our environment. And these days, our kids and ourselves as adults too, we tend to have hyper-developed reactive attention and underdeveloped focused attention. So in other words, it's really good for us to react and to be sort of like the squirrel, here, there, and everywhere. But it's harder for us to actually focus and to think and to reflect on one idea for a significant period of time. And a lot of this has to do with technology, with video games, with handheld devices, TV, the internet. We just have so many digital distractions, and it's so easy to get caught up in them, and they're so addicting that it pulls us away from things that require more of a focused attention, like reading a book, for example, or playing a musical instrument, or maybe practicing martial arts. And I see this as a teacher. Over the years that I've been in the classroom, just in the last 14 years, I have noted a significant decline in the ability of kids to focus for an extended period of time. And this does not bode well for our future as a country or a world. Just think about it. 10, 15, 20 years from now, if you're on the operating table in the emergency room,
Mm-hmm.
and your surgeon has the attention span of a gnat,
Yeah.
I mean, that's really scary.
Yeah, you definitely don't want that surgeon. Oh, look, a squirrel. Next thing you know, you don't have a leg anymore because he thought it was fun to cut your leg off.
Exactly. Well, it could end up being a very significant public health sort of thing, because you think about all these people who are highly distractible and who can't focus getting behind the wheel. And over time, I'm sure that driving is going to be a lot more dangerous than it used to be, because we just have a hard time focusing.
Well, or it's going to get to the point where they're just going to go, well, nobody can drive. We all have self-driving cars. Nobody can get into an accident. And that's going to be the future, right?
Right. Yeah, that's our way around it.
So going back to reactive attention, I've almost wondered, and I think you mentioned this in the book, but I almost wonder, between, sort of our over dependence on always being entertained all the time to, kids not being able to focus for long periods of time. And then, they go out and, teachers are like, we need your kid to focus. They go get diagnosed with ADD. And then, I just wonder how many of the kids out there that have been diagnosed with ADD are really not so much having, a brain development issue as much as having, just a habitual issue with being, attached to these electronics and being focused in on them so much.
Yes. Well, that is a real struggle that we deal with in education, because so many kids are struggling with the ability to focus, and it has an awful lot to do with electronics. And as you mentioned, it's also related to the fact that we want to entertain our kids and make them happy. And I think a lot of parenting these days is being done by iPhone
Mm-hmm.
or iPads and other devices.
So
just let it.
So that iDevice is a surrogate parent, is what you're saying.
Exactly. Or other means of digital entertainment. And I don't have anything against letting your kids play video games. I'm not saying that at all, but that sort of activity needs to be thought of as dessert,
right,
instead of the main course.
It needs to be in moderation.
Yeah, exactly. But it's totally gone in the other direction for many, many, many kids, and a lot of it is related to the fact that in so many families we have both parents who are working. And there are many kids who are in daycare after school. Of course, lots of parents would rather that not be the case and would love to have either mom or dad at home, but financially that's just not feasible for many people in their situations.
Sure.
So, lots of kids are not necessarily being told, no, you can't do that. The first urge is to entertain. And I think that has a lot to do with the inability of people to focus, because we naturally gravitate towards things that are fun and exciting. And if it's not fun and exciting, then why do it? And in the classroom, that's become a very big problem, because focusing on something that's difficult to understand is not fun.
Right.
And so many kids are accustomed to just doing fast, easy, fun, and free. And they're struggling when they have to actually focus and persevere.
Well, I can imagine as being a teacher in this day and age, for you, it's got to be such a challenge, because you're not an entertainer per se. I mean, you may be entertaining, but your job is to teach and to transfer information. And it's, not always the most fun stuff. And I mean, I went through engineering school, so I've sat through a lot of boring schoolwork, but it's just, you're not an entertainer. You're there to transfer knowledge. And I think that sometimes this part of our society where we have this reactive attention, it's, the sort of changing the expectation, I think, a little bit.
Yes, yeah, you're exactly right. And of course, I try to make it engaging and fun and entertaining whenever I can. But there are times when it's not going to be bells and whistles and a circus sort of atmosphere, and it's harder. You really have to crack the whip sometimes to get kids to fall in line, which is the way it's always been. It's not like this is the first challenging period of time in all of history of parenting. But yet, as I said, in my career as a teacher, I have seen a change, and it's not a change in the right direction.
So do you have a lot of technology in your classroom? Because I know my kids, they have this digital whiteboard that has projectors built into it, and they Skype with an underwater lab, and they Skype with the Boston Tea Party folks, and I'm like, I'm totally jealous. I want to go back to elementary school and do all this cool stuff. I'm just curious, how much of the technology do you incorporate, with your kids and into your classroom?
Well, with our own kids, we try to limit the technology. Actually, on a road trip, they'll have devices, and actually in the minivans we removed the TVs because we didn't want that temptation to always be there. But
was there a mutiny in the family from the kids, or?
There was some disagreement. But we try to limit it. Again, that whole idea of moderation, and screens are dessert, not the main course.
Sure.
And we encourage reading and listening to books on CDs, and trying to enjoy each other's company as much as we can. But again, if you have a family, it's a lot easier to parent via device.
Sure.
Because that'll make the kids quiet, and it's really bad for their brains. So I guess as a parent, we try to limit that as much as we can. And in the classroom, technology has really totally altered what we can do. And there's just so many applications, whether it's with doing research online, or bringing in educational video from YouTube and other sources. If we're talking about a current event, I teach history, sixth grade history, and recently there's so many things in the headlines related to separation of powers and immigration, and what can a judge do, what can a judge not do, travel bans. I mean, just all these things that are in the headlines, and it's just exciting, because if a kid asks me a question and I don't know the answer, we can look it up immediately and find the answer, and then that can lead us into another direction and say, oh, well, what about this? What about this? So it makes the whole process of inquiry-based learning possible when that wasn't really totally possible before. But again, I try to keep moderation in mind with all that stuff as well.
So do you keep an old set of encyclopedias around just so you can show the kids how it was before Google?
Yeah, kids, there actually used to be books.
Yeah.
But back in the old days.
And card files, you had to look up the number and then go to the right section, and then make sure you put the card file back, because the librarian will get really mad at you if you don't.
That's right. No, that stuff is that's dark ages.
I guess I'm starting to show some of my age for sure.
Yeah.
Let's go the opposite direction from technology. Well, a little bit of technology, but you've got a huge, strong connection with music. And tell me, how has music made you happy? How have you used music to make others happy? Tell me all about this music thing, because on your website, and our listeners need to know that you've got some great collections of music on there, stuff that you've written. It's fantastic. It's all family friendly, and you should really go to HappinessFinalVideo.com and check it out. But tell me a little bit about your music and where the background came from, and what you're doing today with it.
Oh, sure. Well, thanks. Well, you asked earlier what I do as a dad to try to make myself happier, and actually music is one of those tools that I use. I started playing the violin when I was 4, and I moved into playing piano a few years later. And now I also do a bit of guitar and mandolin and some percussion instruments here and there. But it's just such a central part of my life. I can't imagine not making music, although these days it's very difficult to find the time. But I have put together a number of original compositions that I've written and recorded. And as you said, they're on my website, HappinessFinalVideo.com. And what I do is I put it up there so that people can download the songs for free. And all I ask is that you do something kind for somebody. So this is a way for me to spread my music, but also to spread a bit of kindness. And kindness is one of those habits of happiness that not only improves our own lives, but also has a positive impact on the rest of the world.
Yeah, I love that concept of just, music, but just do something nice for somebody else. I think we just forget about that sometimes.
Well, we do. You talked about the fast-paced, hyper-competitive, hyper-materialistic world that we inhabit, and just the simple act of kindness makes a huge difference in other people's lives, but it also enriches our own emotional well-being.
Since your book was published, is there anything new that you've learned about teaching happiness, or anything that's changed your mind about how you teach happiness?
Well, as soon as I came back from that education conference, I started doing gratitude reflections in the classroom, and I've explored other ways to incorporate gratitude as a teacher. So I've grown a little bit in that direction. I've also become more interested in mindfulness and how to teach mindfulness in the classroom and also at home. And this process of learning more about happiness and creativity has also led me to create some online courses for parents. I have one. It's called Parent's Guide to Surviving Adolescence.
Surviving such an appropriate word.
yeah, it's tough. But with my experiences as a dad and also middle school teacher and an expert in this stuff, I think that I have a unique perspective to help parents get through this period. So that's an online course that I've developed, and I have other courses that relate to to helping adults develop a calmer mind, to help adults work on that sort of mental conditioning to lower our stress so that we become better parents and also just more effective in all that we do. I'm also working on courses and seminars and speaking events related to boosting creativity and making individuals and organizations more innovative. So that one conference changed my life as a teacher and a dad, and it's really propelled me to a lifetime of learning about all the different angles within this domain, and also just an exciting new direction for me to take something I love to do, which is to teach, and now to do that online and to reach out to people all over the world who are thirsting for this knowledge of how to help their kids achieve happiness, but also how to lower our own stress and how to achieve more happiness for ourselves and how to do both of those things at the same time.
So you talked a little bit about incorporating gratitude in the classroom. What's the reaction been from the students and the parents? And have you gotten any flack from the school board? I know there's all this talk in the news about Common Core, and you've got to teach, a specific curriculum. And how's the school and the folks that are involved with the school taking this?
Well, the kids at first think it's a little bit weird.
Right.
Like, what are you doing? I mean, this is history class. Why are you talking about gratitude? Why are you talking about happiness? But, it's just like with your own children. Once you start to have it, there may be some rolling of the eyes and some grumbling, but over time, they get into it. And it just becomes an automatic sort of thing. And I've been doing this now for several years, and students will come back and say that that's made a difference. And I've had parents come up to me and say, my daughter keeps a gratitude journal every night, and I didn't really realize where it came from. And I think she got it in your class.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I started talking about gratitude at Parents' Night a few years ago.
Okay.
And the parents always think, man, this is a great idea. Thank you so much for what you're doing. And we're going to take the gratitude wall idea and we're going to use it in our home and these other things you're talking about as well. So it's positive. This is the universal desire. We all want our kids to be happy. And if they're being taught how to do that at school and at home, then that's just great.
So for some reason, I can picture in my mind here when the kids are complaining about gratitude, you're going, if Napoleon had only practiced gratitude, maybe he wouldn't have lost so many battles.
Yeah. Or, one thing I do have to do sometimes, if the kids are coming into the class and I say, okay, it's time for a moment of gratitude, take out your journal or take out wherever it is that you're keeping track of this. And some kids are kind of slow to do it. So in a humorous sort of way, I'll get in their face and say, come on, I told you to be grateful. And with a program, get grateful.
One thing I've noticed in my kids' school is, all this conversation around bullying. And I think that, do you think that really we're taking the wrong conversation? Because if we talked about gratitude, then there would be probably a whole lot less bullying, is my guess.
Well, that's such a great insight. And that's a driving motivation for me to try to get this message out there, because the people bully because there's some kind of void in their life. Whether it's a tragedy or some kind of difficult situation at home, or they're struggling in school, or there are just so many reasons why people turn to bullying. We're not just born bullies. There are things that happen that drive us in that direction. And the more that we can do to practice gratitude and other habits of happiness at home and in the classroom, then the stronger our community will be. And I know that would have a positive influence on bullying, mean-spirited teasing, and just the way that we treat one another.
So is there anything else you'd like to share with the dads out there about happiness and teaching your kids how to be happy?
Well, I guess my parting thought would be that, just to maintain your sense of humor and, to realize how important we are as dads in getting our kids on track for the best possible lives. And if we just practice certain behaviors and we make it routine, then our kids will have the lives we want them to have.
Well, Mike, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and I wish we had more time because I feel like we could have dived deeper into all of these subjects.
Oh, well, Chris, I've had a lot of fun. Thanks so much for having me. And, I just, once again, I invite your listeners to come to my website, HappinessFinalVideo.com, to download that music if you want, to hear that and spread a little bit of kindness at the same time. And also, I'd love to connect with you on Twitter and Facebook. And if you go to the website, you can do that directly from my website.
So, Mike, your book is Teaching Happiness and Innovation, and people can buy that on your website or on Amazon or Amazon Kindle, right?
That's correct.
And then your website is happinessandinnovation.com, and your Twitter is @MikeFerry7. Was 1 through 6 all taken?
Yeah. And, 7's my lucky number. So
okay, all right. There's the magic right there. So,
that's
Mike,
right.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the Dad Time Podcast. And don't forget to find the Dad Time Podcast on the internet, Facebook, and Twitter. Our website is www.dadtimepodcast.com, and you can find us on Twitter at DadTimePodcast. We're also on Facebook at www.facebook.com/DadTimePodcast. We also have a YouTube channel that you can check out. And finally, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. These links and all the links from our show are listed in the show notes on iTunes and on YouTube. Thanks for listening to the Dad Time Podcast, and we'll see you next time.